Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Arthritis Action Podcast. I am Mark. I'm your host for today, and I'm also joined by my colleagues Leah and Terry. So, hello, both.
Hello.
Hi.
So today we're going to be talking about young adults with arthritis. So, any age range comes with its own set of challenges, and especially when it comes to arthritis. And I think that young people quite often still aren't really thought of as much. There's still that kind of stigma which you hear about all the time, where people think it's just like arthritis is something you get when you're old and only when you're old. But as we know, and as we've said so many times, and you're probably bored of us saying it, but you can get it at any age. And, there's so many different types of it. They all have their sort of special intricacies, and they can affect you at different times in your life. So even though a lot of the methods and sort of treatments and self-management strategies and all things we recommend remain the same, people's lives at the age of 20 or 30 or 40, or depending on what your lifestyle is, might be different from that of what you do when you're 70 years old. Today we did want to focus on some of the unique challenges and the more common sort of things that people who are younger will face when it comes to arthritis. So we're going to split it up today, make it a little bit different, and we're going to have a few different categories. We're going to split it into like 4 little sections. So like some of the more common things that we sort of find that from like our experience in the groups and our work with the charity that we find do affect younger people. Category number 1, work and uni. Who wants to go for that first? I can make it easier, actually. I'll ask you a question.
Yeah.
So, what do you think are some of like the biggest adjustments that need to be made, for work or for uni life?
I think the biggest adjustment that I've come across with people kind of phoning in, emailing, coming along to our groups is telling staff, telling friends that or colleagues, employers, that they have arthritis, and going from there. Because I think without that open communication, adjustments can't be made. You're kind of struggling along by yourself. I think the first step of telling people that you have a disability, that you need a bit of extra support, can come in really handy. But obviously having the courage to say that, we understand it can be really difficult. So I think it's having that open communication, and that kind of gets the ball rolling, really.
I think another big one might be, getting to lectures or, study groups or whatever it would be. And, that I think one of the good things, possibly that came out of COVID was the fact that everyone had to go to, live streaming, whether that's, using Zoom or Teams. And I think that's opened up a lot of possibilities for people to be a bit more flexible to their approach to, not only education at uni, but at work as well, because you can join lectures online. So, if you're having a day where you are, you're experiencing a bad day, you can't get out. You can't get up, you can't get out. But, just by opening up your laptop or a tablet or a phone, you can join in the lecture or a work meeting, right from the comfort of your own home. So I think that's the barrier is there, but I think it can be overcome by technology.
Definitely. I remember when when you and I, Terry, we did our podcast with Diana in the last series. And that's something that she mentioned it had been a really big help to her, is the fact that if she can't get to uni on one of those days, they'll just send her a link and then she can like watch it back, when she's feeling a bit better, because they were recording the sessions. So that's really good to hear that that's still going on as well.
Definitely. And I think as well, universities have disability teams, they've got disability student union officers. You might be able to get a note taker, for example, if you struggle with typing or taking notes in lectures. So I think it's kind of knowing all the support you can get, really. Is there maybe any support with technology to help you with the cost? Anything else, really? I think it's key to ask. And that way you can work out your own plan and be a bit more supported in doing it.
And then you can look at equipment as well. You can get ergonomic keyboards, ergonomic mouses. You can get, the speech to type technology. So, if you are, if your hands, fingers, are an issue, then you can look into those equipments, those technologies, and I'm sure that there'll be help and guidance through the student union and the departments within the university, but occupational health teams at work and that. So it's definitely worth investigating those sorts of things, the equipments, the technology that will just help make life a bit easier.
Definitely. And I think we mentioned in our last series about work and the Access to Work Fund as well. So there's definitely support out there. It's just knowing how to access it, really, and knowing what you're entitled to.
Yeah, the Access to Work scheme is definitely one that's really useful, because I know that back when you mentioned about communication as well, this all sort of links together with that. It's like people at work especially can worry that if they tell their employer about it, then there's going to be issues, so they can't do their job and so on like that. But something, because maybe it's a small company that doesn't have any spare money, and you think that they don't at least, then they can get some money sort of from the Access to Work scheme, and that could help pay for some of the stuff so that you can keep doing your job. Because, as we've said before, it's much cheaper to keep someone and do things like this than it is to hire and train a new person. So just always bear that in mind, that you are much more valuable than you perhaps think you are, because it costs a lot of money to hire a new person.
Exactly, and the number of times that I've spoke to people in manual orientated jobs, the first thing that comes to mind is retail. Working in supermarkets where you're having to, put products on shelves. Quite often that's quite a challenge when you're doing long shifts. It's saying, well, what can I do? I've worked here, I've gone through the training. Is there anything I can do that you can do to make my work a bit more easier? Are there reasonable adjustments to my job? Can I do some work in the office? Can I do some work on the checkouts where I can sit down? And being flexible as well, and saying, I've got this this health problem, this health condition. I love working here. I want to continue working here, but this is a challenge. Being honest, as we're talking about, being honest and saying this is a challenge. But is there anything that we can do together to for me to work here?
I think one thing as well, again, to bring back to your previous point, Terry, is like after the pandemic. I mean, I don't want to keep singing the praises of the pandemic, of course. I mean, overall, we can agree it wasn't a great time, but it has led to a lot more places being open to flexible working, because everything changed. Some places haven't. Obviously, I'm sorry if like one of your places is one that went back to being very rigid through choice or necessity, but like there are a lot more options out there for things like flexible working hours. So things had to change previously, so now I guess people have been forced to adapt and change a bit more than they would have done. So have lots and lots of other places that I know of.
But I think just keeping along those lines, Mark, I think that I think the trend is now that unfortunately places are calling people back more. Some big organisations are definitely doing that, and friends of mine have their companies have asked them to go back one day more, in the hope that more people, they'll see more people in the office, because it was quite flexible. So they'd say two days in the office, but most people go in sort of one day, whereas they're saying 3 days, in the hope that they'll go in 2 days. So there's that sort of flexibility, but as you can see, there's that upward trend of wanting people in the office more. And I think if that's a fear for people, be honest with your managers, be honest with your HR team. And if you are in a place where there is occupational health, then talk to them, because it's important to be honest and say, well, I recognise you want us in, I need to come into the office a bit more. What can happen? What can you do to help that? So yeah, it's we've said it several times now, but it's honesty is the best policy.
Absolutely. And
being open and transparent, and
Cool. Let's move on to something a little bit lighter now, maybe. Although I suppose it's all going to have its challenges. But yeah, next topic. So let's start talking about how it can sort of change your social life. So we have sort of done some episodes on this as well, but is there anything sort of you guys wanted to add on that?
People want to be busy, don't they? And I think it's also, again, comes down to communication and how much you accept your arthritis and how much you know it impacts you and what you want to do. I think when you're younger, in particular, I think you maybe might want to be going out, you might want to be having lots of fun, but then on the day when it comes to it, you might feel absolutely exhausted. Are you able to communicate that with your friends or your family or not? Or do you push through and then maybe feel tired and exhausted? So I think a lot of it again comes down to acceptance and communication.
I was talking to someone the other day about this, and they're sort of fairly newly diagnosed, and they haven't actually really told any of their family or friends about it yet. And that's quite common as well, is to not necessarily tell everyone about it. There are people that do know. I think some of their colleagues or something know, but like they're trying to limit their exposure to it, which is like, it's quite common and not everyone wants to. So they're having to adjust how they live their social lives, so that at least for now, they are planning on getting over with at some point. But until they've got a full handle on it, they kind of want to keep it to themselves, which is like, we're of course advocates of, like, as we've said already, communication and letting people know and explaining all this, because for the long run, that will likely be better. But some people will, it will affect your life, especially if you don't feel capable of telling everyone straight away.
Isn't it funny? Like, not funny, but like the stigma that sort of attaches itself to you when you've got something like arthritis, and really you feel that you have to hide it, and actually as you say, it's being open and honest is the best policy. And I think I'm glad you started up this conversation on social life, because I was going to keep it along sort of bit more along the sad route from what we were talking about, more of the serious route. Because we in a recent group, Leah, we had, and it was one of our younger adults was being quite open, and they said that they'd actually isolated themselves and lost some friends, and it was quite a poignant moment, really, because I think they'd come to that. It was quite surreal at the same time, because they seemed to come to that sort of conclusion at that moment, and it sort of hit them. And I think it's important to be open and not allow that sort of stigma to take hold, and say, well, this is what's happening. There are other more, I guess, life-threatening or terminal illnesses out there that you would be more open about. But with arthritis, it's not, because it could be because it's unseen. It's, it could, I don't know. It's difficult, because I think you have to be open and just say, look, I love you. I want to be your friend. I love having friends, but this is what's going on. And, this is what might happen some days, where we might plan to go out, but actually I might wake up feeling like actually I can't go out. But yeah, it was quite a surreal thing, wasn't it, Leah, that at that moment it suddenly hit them that actually because they'd isolated themselves, they found that they'd sort of lost some friends, and that was it was quite sad in a way.
Yeah, I completely agree. And then also somebody else in the group said that when you're diagnosed with a long-term condition like arthritis, you really find out who your real friends are. And I thought that was actually a really good point, because it's much better to maybe have a smaller group of people that want to help you, that understand what you're going through, and put a lot less pressure on you to conform. Or because we always, when we talk about self-management, we kind of say, look what you can do now, really, rather than comparing yourself to what you used to be able to do. And I think if you have friends that think that you have to be able to do everything you did before in order to be their friend, that's really difficult and that's really stressful. So I think, it was a really good conversation, because they were kind of helping to balance each other out.
I think another thing that sort of does come up along with, like, when sort of like as you get all the sort of various changes in your body and how it reacts and how it feels to things, is a lot of people don't necessarily want to complain about it to their friends, because you're worried that constantly no one wants to hear you just moan about your knees or back or whatever the whole time you're there. And this is something I've heard a lot of people say, and I'm not a big fan of it myself, is when they say, oh, there's people with it much worse than them, so they don't really mention it. They're like, no, what you feel is still completely valid, and you should be able to talk to your friends about it. It may be a kind of like a balancing act of figuring out how much you can do so to make sure that you're still, having a positive relationship with your friends as well. If you literally complain, it's the only thing you ever do, people probably won't want to talk to you. So you got to make sure that you're not just only talking about that. But it is important that you do still do that, because, they're your friends. They want to support you. They love you. And if they don't, then they don't. Maybe you need new friends. Maybe you need to find someone else to talk to. Maybe you do need, if you really do need a higher level of support, maybe you find someone, outside of your friendship group that you talk to. And there's loads of various services available from the government, from the councils. On our website, we have a mental health directory. So that way you can look up there, find someone in your area that you could talk to in that sense as well. So there's always lots of options for you to do. But the important thing is, as they say, don't isolate yourself and don't just cut yourself off because you think, that people don't want to hang out with you or you're an inconvenience. Because to be honest, I think if you spoke to your friends about that, they'd probably tell you you're an idiot and that's not true. And they do want to hang out with you because, that's what your friends do.
And it's also looking at, the activities that you do, thinking that actually I really want to hang out with you, but actually I can't go clubbing that night because, I know that, I'm not able to, or if I hit the dance floor and throw some shapes, I'm going to be in bed for the next 2 or 3 days. And actually, alcohol has a bad impact on my joints as well, because if I drink wine, I know it might it's going to flare up, and so it's. But actually, I just want to hang out with you, so let's go for coffee. Let's just meet up and chat, or go for a short walk or something. And I think it's being a bit more proactive, or planning your activities a bit better. So yeah, perhaps no energetic dancing on the dance floor unless you are feeling on top of the world and are prepared to face the next few days of being in a bit of pain. But actually looking at, is there a more gentler way of hanging out with your friends?
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, because in one of the younger adult groups that we had, somebody was saying that they have a few venues. I think they were talking about pubs that they've scoped out. So they know that there's disabled toilets. They know it's easy for them to get to the venue. There's kind of space for the taxi to stop for them outside and things like that. So I think it's kind of also having it. It's an extra level of work and preparation, but knowing those places where you can feel comfortable that you can suggest, rather than feeling like maybe other people are planning something without taking your needs into consideration. That's something else that can be really helpful. So when you're there, you're feeling comfortable because it's a place that you can access.
There's a good website as well, which I think I mentioned before, and I think there's also an app version of it as well. So it's called Accessible or Accessible. I'm not sure exactly how they pronounce that, but yes, it's accessible.co.uk, and that's one where you can look up various different venues, supermarkets, places, all that type of stuff. So if you want to do a bit of advanced planning, then some of them, they don't all have the same level of detail, but most of them do have are there are there steps leading into the venue? Do they have they'll have pictures of the outside and of the parking and stuff like that. So just loads of information that, might help you plan a trip a bit better should you need to plan in advance. Because I do know a few people who they worry about going to a new venue because whatever that might be, whether it be a restaurant, cafe, or a pub or whatever, because they have no idea is there going to be massive steps to get in the front door? Because if so, they might get in, but they're not getting out, or all these different worries. So it might be useful to have a look. There's a few different websites like that as well, but that's one we've been recommended by a few of our members as well.
And another thing to consider, I think, is work and social life. Because I think it's important to have the two. To not only work, be with your colleagues in the workplace, but actually socialise with them outside of those work hours. And unfortunately, trying to do both can be quite difficult if you've got a long-term health condition and such as arthritis, when you might be fatigued. So it's thinking about how you can do that. So it might be that maybe you need to book the next day off, or maybe take the next half day as a holiday to recover, or actually say, oh, is it actually okay if I just work from home the next day, if that's like a working in the office day? Because it's important to do both, right? To be social with your colleagues, but actually taking that into consideration, saying actually, because we've heard before, again, Leah, in one of our, groups for younger adults, is someone's had to book either that day off work to go out that evening or the next day or 2 days. But where you can work flexibly, maybe saying, oh, actually, I'd love to go out and socialise. Is there any way that we can work around this, that can happen?
Yeah, completely agree. And also some people have said that they've done similar when they've returned from holiday, where they've been away, they've then had to use their travel time and they're feeling exhausted from that. And also being confused as to whether they should have to use their annual leave or sick days or flexibility, because sometimes being a bit embarrassed to say that they've had this really great holiday, but the travel has also exhausted them. So yeah, it can be a really difficult situation. But again, I feel if your employer knows the impact your arthritis has, I think it's easier for them to be open to more flexible options. So then you're not having to eat into your annual leave days to rest and recuperate.
That has led us very nicely, the pair of you, very stylishly done into topic 3, which was sort of like traveling and holidays. So very nicely segued there. But yeah, no, it is something that loads of people struggle with, as you've said, Leah, having to use annual leave as sick or as your sick days, when really should it just be maybe deal with flexi time or something like that. It's a tricky one, that one, to negotiate. I suppose you have to have a good relationship with your work to an extent. In our previous episode on work and arthritis as well, we go into a lot more detail on things like, using your sick days for annual leave and also talking to your employers about it as well. So if you did want to listen to a longer version of that as well, because it's a little bit of a whistle-stop tour through young adults arthritis today. But so let's do a little bit on we mentioned sort of holidays and everything. Like, what about holidays? That can be just traveling or going away, whether that be with your friends, by yourself, or just getting away.
Yeah, one thing, it came up again in our young adult groups. These are a really great place, I think, to share tips and experiences. So I can't remember the name of the company, but I think from what the person was saying, there were kind of multiple, depending on which airline you choose. And they're like porter or courier companies that will, depending on the airline you're flying with, will pick your luggage up from your house and go and check it in for you. So all you have to worry about is getting to the airport. You don't have to carry anything. You get all of your documentation and things like that, and they sort it all out for you. There is a cost to that. And so she was saying that she felt fortunate that was something she was able to do. But I think it's looking for anything really that can make your life easier. Is that maybe having what's the word? Not transport when you get to the airport, but somebody that can maybe take you through the terminal to get to the departure gate.
Airport assistance.
That's it, yeah. And you can, maybe if there's things on train lines, I know on Transport for London, they offer assistance. You can turn up and travel. But again, it's just looking into things that make your life easier rather than feeling you've got to struggle along with lots of luggage and you've started your holiday, but you may have kind of started it being a bit stressed out and in a lot of pain because of the overall process. So that could be helpful.
I had a really fun thing the other day, actually, that this is something that's starting to happen in more places. So I was told, just someone heard on the radio, I think it's Japan who started doing it. At airports, you can rent clothes and everything when you get there. So when you arrive at the airport, they have a bag and you have that bag for your holiday. And at the end of the holiday, you give it back. So that way you don't even have to bring clothes. You just tell them the size you are. And then also, well, I guess they'll figure out what season it is. Like, here's based on the weather now, here's a kit for your 1 week holiday.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That's great.
I'm going skiing in the Alps. Oh, here's some shorts and t-shirts.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good idea. That saves a lot of work.
I hope that sort of catches on a bit more, or is more common than I. So maybe look into that if you're going to another country as well, in case they've adopted this scheme. But I thought that was just such a great idea, especially if traveling with bags and stuff is going to be an issue for you. If you can just arrive and you have a bag there, then that's be wonderful.
Yeah, and being able to give it back afterwards and not have to do the washing and drying afterwards. That sounds amazing. Well, I hope it does come to the UK. And I think, Leah, that what you were saying earlier about, having your bags taken for you and all checked in. And no, that's it. I know there are. I think it was Airporter, which was a company, but they work with limited airlines. Whereas I'm sure there's probably services out there that would offer that to anyone. And I think it's worth having a look and actually saying, right, this is my holiday, and actually being a bit more practical about it. Okay, so where is going to be good for me? Okay, so let's look at going on a relaxing holiday where it's going to be warm, because that tends to be, just from people I speak to, the warmth is good. Okay, so let's pick a country. Okay, so how are we going to get there? Okay, airport. What do I need at the airport? Or how am I going to get to the airport? And then what do I need at the airport to help me through? So airport assistance. So it's actually taking a holiday, not just on the morning of departure. You're like, oh, how am I going to do this? What's going to go? Because that's an extra level of stress you don't need. So actually removing that stress before you get to that point. And actually knowing that, right, okay, I'll tick this off, airport assistance done. Whatever it is, seat with extra legroom done. And obviously some of these things there's an extra cost, extra legroom or whatever. But is the pros of that going to outweigh the cons? And I think that's being a bit more proactive, a bit more practical about your holidays will not only help you physically, but will remove that mental load as well, that mental stress, and actually think, well, this is going to be, really looking forward to this.
And speaking of mental stress, that leads us on to our next topic, which is parenting. So,
okay.
So yeah, parenting, like either for kids or pets. I know, basically, I myself have animals rather than children, which each to their own. They all come with their own challenges, especially. And yeah, so let's kick off with that one. Who wants to weigh in on parenting with arthritis?
I will. I feel qualified to do this out of the three of us. Because Mark, you said you don't have children. Leah, you might be hiding them somewhere, but I don't think you have any children.
No, I've got pets instead. So
yeah, you've got pets. I've got 3 children and a cat. So I think I can tick both boxes on that front.
You take this one then. What do we need to know?
I won't be too honest. I think, well, my wife, she is living with what seems to be chronic fatigue. So actually, there are times where, she is in, having to rest. She's having to lie down and recover and manage that. So, she has to be, from her point of view, she has to be honest with me, and I have to manage the children. So it's like, actually, mum isn't feeling too great today, or she would tell, she would speak to them as well, and they would help, be able to help out and understand. So it's actually, being honest, being open, being frank, because you need your family to be aware of what's going on and the implications of why something isn't happening, or why we need to do something a bit different. Speaking to a member of Arthritis Action, they were talking about, I guess the downside of parenting, of running a family home. This person was saying that actually she felt her family were being quite negative towards her by actually saying that she's lazy because there wasn't enough stuff. The housework wasn't being done, or the dinner was. And actually, it's really, really difficult, because it's, when you're trying to pace, you can't do all of that at the same time. And I think having that honest conversation is important. And I think, throughout this, that we could almost call this the honesty podcast, because it's actually, we have mentioned that word honesty quite a number of times, and having that open communication. Again, social life, holidays, planning when you're going to do things, how you're going to do things. You know, looking at Marc, I know you've got dogs, so dog walks. When you're caring for pets, it's all planning when you're going to do these things, because as we know, people with arthritis, there's ups and downs. You feel good one day, so that's a good time to say, actually, or it might be a good time of day where you think, oh, right, let's take the dog out for a walk, or let's go to the park.
One thing I have heard from other people as well is one thing they're trying to do is to almost make it into a game for their kids. If they need help with stuff, then to get them to, like, it becomes a fun challenge. Like, right, okay, mummy needs all this stuff. Like, right, you do this, go. And they sort of rush off. And then, like, both come back who can get mum stuff quicker, it was adorable to see. I saw some of that.
I might try that.
Yeah, go for it. I mean, I assume it'll work. Just got to give him a little treat at the end. I don't know. I'm talking like a dog owner again. Give him a treat.
I'm not going to give mine I'm not going to call mine over and give him a dog biscuit. Be more like a sweet.
Yeah. One thing we'll be covering sort of pets and arthritis a bit in the future. We'll be doing a lot more on that one. So yeah, this again, a bit of a whistle stop tour for this one.
We also did a webinar about pregnancy and parenting. So yes. Our guest has arthritis and has quite a young child. So she gives some really great tips and experiences as well. So that's available on our website to watch.
And I think more sort of practically speaking, Leah, about that is, if you're in a position where you can, or you might need to, and if you can, you look at things to make your life easier. Can you get in, practical support around the home? People to come in and clean, or people to come in and look after your children. Even if it is just for an hour or so a week. What's going to make life that bit easier physically, and that mental load as well.
Excellent. I mean, I think there's a lot more we probably could talk about, especially on this subject as well. So if this is something you'd like us to do, like, a full episode on or a bit more about, please do let us know. And, you can get in touch with us we've got an email address for the podcast, which is podcast@arthritisaction.org.uk. But if you were to visit our website, which is www.arthritisaction.org.uk, there are loads of other resources available for young adults. I don't know if you two want to tell us a little bit about those.
There's a lot on there. I think that's the key. And
we'll keep it short. Yeah. Keep it short. Don't tell everything. Give us the gist.
So there's a good mix, really. We've got our young adult hub, which covers, and by young adult, we mean going up to people in their 40s as well. So there's loads on there, lots of different topics like work, socialising, travel. And we've got some really great videos on there as well, and lots of different resources, and also a young adult newsletter called Arthritis and Me.
And let's not forget this podcast, Marc.
Absolutely.
You can listen to all of the episodes. Not only do we have series 1, but we've got this series as well. So yeah, hopefully it's a fan favourite. It's number 1 on everyone's podcast list.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can, we are available on Spotify, Apple, Google, or wherever you're listening to it now. It's also on our website as well. And yeah, thank you so much for listening, everybody. Really appreciate it. And yeah, do subscribe, leave us nice reviews. Go tell all your friends about it.
Tell your health providers as well, your doctors, your GPs, everyone that you see, the rheumatology teams. Just tell everyone you know about the podcast. We want everyone listening.
Definitely. Brilliant. Okay, well, we were before we pat ourselves on the back too much there. I think we'll end it there. So thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciate your time. And thank you, Leah and Terry, as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marc. Thanks, Leah.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.